The widow's black dress cut through the dusty street like a raven's wing against bleached bone, and every head turned to watch Josephine Sawyer walk toward the general store with the same mixture of fear and pity that had followed her for the past 4 years. She kept her chin high despite the whispers that trailed behind her like tumbleweeds, despite knowing that every soul in Williams, Arizona believed she carried death in her wake. 3 husbands dead and buried before any had reached their 30th birthday, each claimed by circumstances so bizarre that the superstitious folk of this high desert town had long ago declared her cursed. It was the spring of 1884, and Josephine had lived with the weight of their judgment for long enough that it had settled into her bones like the persistent chill that came down from the San Francisco peaks at night. She was only 26 years old, but the black fabric she wore had become like a second skin, and the sympathetic glances from the women had hardened into something else entirely over time. No one spoke to her directly anymore unless they had to. The children were forbidden to play near her small house on the edge of town. Even Reverend Thompson had stopped trying to convince her to attend Sunday services after the congregation began finding excuses to leave when she arrived. Her first husband, Thomas, had been thrown from his horse 3 days after their wedding. The animal had been spooked by something no one could identify, had reared back and sent Thomas flying into a rock formation that split his skull clean through. Her second husband, William, had died 6 months into their marriage when a rattlesnake somehow found its way into their bed during the night, striking him twice before Josephine even woke. Her third husband, Robert, had lasted nearly a year before a flash flood swept through a canyon where no rain had fallen, dragging him and his horse downstream while he checked their cattle. His body was found 3 days later, 5 miles from where the water had taken him. Josephine pushed open the door to Miller's General Store, the bell chiming overhead in a cheerful sound that felt wrong given the silence that descended the moment she entered. Martha Miller, who had been gossiping with 2 other women near the fabric bolts, pressed her lips together and turned away. The other women followed suit, gathering their skirts as though the curse might transfer through proximity. Josephine had long since stopped feeling the sharp sting of their rejection. Now it was just a dull ache, familiar as the Arizona heat. She gathered her supplies methodically, counting out coins she could barely afford to spend. The small inheritance from Robert had nearly run dry, and the seamstress work she took in was barely enough to keep food on her table. No one wanted to hire the cursed widow for anything more than they absolutely had to, and even then, they left payment on her doorstep rather than knock. "Heard the railroad is bringing in new workers," Martha Miller said loudly to her companions, her voice carrying through the store with deliberate clarity. "I do hope they are warned about certain dangers in Williams before they get too comfortable here." Josephine's fingers tightened on the bag of flour she held, but she said nothing. What was there to say? That she was not cursed, that 3 men dying around her was merely terrible coincidence. She had said those words until her throat was raw in the months after Robert's death, and no one had believed her. The town had made up its mind, and the story of the cursed widow was far more interesting than the story of a desperately unlucky woman. She was leaving the store when she nearly collided with a man on the wooden sidewalk. He caught her elbow to steady her, his grip warm and solid through the fabric of her sleeve. Josephine looked up, ready to apologize, and found herself staring into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. They were the color of the sky just before dawn, bright and clear, and entirely without the fear or judgment she had grown accustomed to seeing in every face. "Pardon me, madam," the man said, tipping his hat. He was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, worn but well-maintained, and he wore a gun at his hip with the casual ease of someone who knew how to use it. I was not watching where I was going. No harm done, Josephine managed, stepping back from his touch even though some part of her mourned the loss of that simple human contact. How long had it been since someone had touched her without flinching? The man studied her face for a moment, and she waited for the recognition to dawn, for his expression to shift into that familiar mask of superstitious fear. But instead, he smiled, a slow, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I am Ross Xavier, just arrived in town yesterday. Working for the ranch north of here, if you know it." The Triple Creek Ranch, Josephine said, because everyone knew it. It was the largest spread in the territory, running cattle from Williams all the way up into the high country. "Yes, I know it. And might I have the pleasure of your name?" Ross asked, still smiling, and Josephine felt her chest tighten with a mixture of gratitude and dread. He did not know. He had no idea who she was, what they said about her. For just this one moment, she was simply a woman talking to a man on a spring afternoon, and the sweetness of that normalcy was almost painful. "Josephine Sawyer," she said quietly, watching for the change. His smile did not falter. "That is a beautiful name, Josephine. It suits you." Before she could respond, Martha Miller emerged from the store, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. "Mr. Xavier," she said sharply, "I see you have met our local widow. Perhaps I should warn you that Mrs. Sawyer has had a most unfortunate history. 3 husbands, all dead under mysterious circumstances. The town generally considers it wise to keep a certain distance." Josephine felt the familiar shame wash over her, hot and suffocating. She ducked her head, preparing to walk away, to retreat to her small house where at least the walls did not whisper about her. But Ross Xavier did not step back. Instead, he turned to Martha Miller with a pleasant expression that somehow carried an edge of steel. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Miller," he said, his tone polite but firm. "But where I come from, we do not put much stock in superstition. Terrible things happen in this world, and sometimes they happen to the same person more than once. That does not make them cursed. It makes them unlucky and in need of kindness rather than judgment." Martha's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on a riverbank. Josephine stared at Ross Xavier in shock, unable to quite believe that someone had defended her, had spoken words she had thought so many times but never managed to make anyone else believe. Ross turned back to her, and his expression softened. "Mrs. Sawyer, I wonder if you might be willing to show me around Williams sometime. I am new to town, and I would appreciate a friendly guide." "I am not certain friendly is the word most would use to describe me," Josephine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then most people are fools," Ross said simply. "What do you say? Perhaps tomorrow afternoon if you have the time." Josephine knew she should refuse. Knew that being seen with her would taint him in the town's eyes, that Martha Miller would spread this story through Williams like wildfire, that he would soon learn what it meant to associate with the cursed widow. But the kindness in his eyes, the simple human decency of his offer, was more than she had experienced in years. She found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "Tomorrow afternoon," she agreed. "I could meet you at the church at 2 o'clock. "I will be there," Ross promised, tipping his hat again. He nodded politely to Martha Miller, who still stood gaping, and strode off down the street with long, easy strides that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. Josephine clutched her supplies and hurried home before Martha could launch into the lecture that was clearly building behind her pinched expression. Her small house sat at the edge of town, a tidy building that Robert had built for them when they married. It felt too empty now, too full of ghosts that only she could see. She set her supplies on the kitchen table and moved to the window, staring out at the high desert landscape that surrounded Williams. The town sat at nearly 7,000 feet, nestled in the ponderosa pine forests that covered these mountains. It was beautiful country, with the San Francisco peaks rising to the north like ancient gods watching over the land. The railroad had come through a few years back, bringing growth and prosperity to Williams. It was a good town, or it had been, before Josephine had become its resident cautionary tale. She allowed herself, just for a moment, to imagine what it might be like to walk through Williams with Xavier, to show him the places she had once loved before the curse of widow's weeds had isolated her from everything and everyone. The old trading post where the Navajo came to sell their beautiful silver work and woven blankets. The small restaurant that served the best steak in the territory. The path up toward the peaks where the aspens turned gold in the fall, and the air was so clean it made your lungs ache. But even as she imagined it, she felt the familiar weight of dread settling over her shoulders. Xavier did not know what he was offering. By tomorrow evening, Martha Miller would have made certain every person in Williams knew that the new cowboy at the Triple Creek Ranch was courting death by associating with Josephine Sawyer. They would warn him away, would tell him the stories of Thomas and William and Robert, would make him understand that to care for her was to invite disaster. And if he was smart, he would listen. Josephine changed out of her good dress and into her work clothes, settling at her sewing table with the latest commission, a set of curtains for the hotel. The work was mindless, repetitive, and it gave her too much time to think. She tried not to hope, tried not to imagine that Xavier might be different from everyone else, that he might see her as something other than a harbinger of death. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to more pain, and she had had quite enough of that already. The next afternoon arrived with the inevitability of sunrise. Josephine dressed carefully in her black dress, the one that was slightly less worn than the others, and pinned her dark hair up in a simple style. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror and saw a woman who appeared older than her 26 years, care and grief having carved lines around her eyes and mouth. But her eyes were still green, still clear, and as she stared at her reflection, she made a decision. If Xavier was foolish enough to keep his appointment despite what he would have surely heard by now, she would not hide herself away. She would not pretend to be anything other than what she was. And if he chose to walk away after knowing the full truth, well, that was no more than she expected. She arrived at the church at precisely 2 o'clock, half expecting to find no one waiting. But Xavier stood in the shade of the building, his horse tied nearby, looking as easy and comfortable as he had the day before. When he saw her, his face lit up with genuine pleasure, and Josephine felt something in her chest crack just a little. "Mrs. Sawyer," he said, walking to meet her. "I am glad you came. I was worried you might have changed your mind." "I am surprised you did not change yours," Josephine said honestly. "I imagine you have heard quite a lot about me since yesterday." Ross's expression grew serious. "I have heard talk," he admitted. "A great deal of superstitious nonsense from people who should know better. But I told you yesterday what I think of such things, and my opinion has not changed." "3 husbands, Mr. Xavier," Josephine said, needing him to understand. 3 men, all dead within years of marrying me. Thomas was 24. William was 27. Robert was 29. None of them lived long enough to see 30. "And you think you killed them?" Ross asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that directly. They simply assumed, whispered, judged. "No," she said finally. I do not think I killed them, but I cannot explain why they all died. I cannot give anyone a reason that makes sense. And when 3 men die around the same woman, people talk. People decide. The truth stops mattering. Ross nodded slowly. My father died when I was 12, he said. Kicked by a horse while working the ranch we had in Texas. My older brother died the next year of a fever that swept through our town. My mother died when I was 16, just worn out from grief and hard work. I was the only one left. Some folks in our town said I was cursed too, that death followed me. Said I was the angel of death, come to claim my whole family. Josephine stared at him, seeing the old pain in his eyes, the understanding that came from having walked a similar path. How did you bear it? I left, Ross said simply. Went north, worked ranches all through Colorado and New Mexico, kept moving until I found places where no one knew my story. Built a new life where I was just Ross Xavier, a cowboy who was good with horses and better with cattle. Eventually, the pain eased. The memories stayed, but they stopped feeling like open wounds. I learned that some people will always believe the worst, will always need someone to blame when bad things happen. But their beliefs do not define me. Only I get to decide who I am. His words settled into her like seeds in fertile soil, radical and strange and full of possibility. Why did you ask to spend time with me? Josephine asked. Surely there are women in Williams who would welcome your attention without the complication of my reputation. Ross smiled, and it was that same slow, genuine smile that had startled her so much the day before. Because when I look at you, I see someone who has survived more than most people could bear. I see strength and grace and a kind of quiet dignity that impresses me more than I can say. And because yesterday, when we spoke, I saw intelligence and kindness in your eyes. That matters to me far more than idle gossip. Josephine felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She had not cried in years, had taught herself that tears were a luxury she could not afford. You barely know me. Then let me know you better, Ross said. Show me your town, Josephine. Talk to me. Let me decide for myself who you are, not based on what frightened people whisper, but on what I see with my own eyes. So she did. They walked through Williams together, and Josephine showed him the places she had once loved. She took him to the old trading post, where a Navajo woman named Sarah greeted Josephine with more warmth than most in town did. Sarah did not believe in curses, had told Josephine so after Robert died, and she welcomed them both with coffee and conversation. Ross admired the silver work and turquoise jewelry, asking intelligent questions about the craftsmanship that made Sarah smile and expand into stories of her family and their traditions. They went to the small restaurant, where the owner, an older man named Carl who had come west during the gold rush, served them steak and potatoes without comment. Carl had lost 2 wives himself to the harsh realities of frontier life, and he had never judged Josephine for her losses. He and Ross talked about cattle and horses and the best routes through the high country, while Josephine sat and listened and felt something inside her beginning to thaw. As the afternoon faded into evening, they walked the path toward the mountains, not going far, just far enough to see the aspens beginning to bud and the wildflowers starting to emerge from the winter-frozen ground. The air was cool and clean, scented with pine and earth, and the setting sun painted the San Francisco peaks in shades of gold and rose. It is beautiful here, Ross said quietly, standing beside her as they looked out over the forest. It is, Josephine agreed. I have always loved this place, even when the people in it have made life difficult. Will you tell me about them? Ross asked. Your husbands, not how they died, but who they were, what you loved about them. Josephine was quiet for a long moment, surprised by the question. No one ever asked about the men themselves, only about their deaths. But Ross waited patiently, his presence steady and calm beside her, and eventually she began to speak. "Thomas was my first love," she said softly. "We grew up together here in Williams. He was kind and funny, always making people laugh. He wanted to start a horse ranch to breed the finest animals in the territory. We were so young when we married, barely 22. We thought we had all the time in the world." She paused, remembering Thomas's laugh, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. "When he died, I thought the world had ended. I could not imagine surviving that pain." "But you did," Ross said gently. "I did," Josephine confirmed. "And after 2 years, I met William. He was a freight driver, brought supplies up from Flagstaff. He was quiet, steady, the opposite of Thomas in many ways. He did not try to replace Thomas, and I appreciated that. He gave me space to grieve while also giving me hope that I might love again. We were building something good together when the snake killed him. The doctor said it was a miracle I did not get bitten too, that the snake somehow struck him twice and left me untouched even though we were in the same bed." "That must have been terrifying," Ross said. "It was," Josephine whispered. "And it was when people started to truly believe I was cursed. 1 death was tragic, 2 was suspicious. After William, the whispers started in earnest. But you married again." "I did. Robert was a rancher, ran a small operation south of here. He courted me for a year, knowing full well what people said, not caring. He said he did not believe in curses, that he believed in taking chances on happiness. We had almost a year together, a good year. I thought maybe we would make it, maybe the curse was just talk. Then the flood came." Her voice broke slightly and she stopped. Ross reached out and took her hand, his palm warm against hers. It was such a simple gesture, but it meant everything. "You loved them all," he said, "and you lost them all. I cannot imagine the strength it took to keep going after all that." "I did not have much choice," Josephine said, looking down at their joined hands. "Life does not stop because your heart is broken. The sun still rises. You still need to eat, to work, to survive. So you do." "But survival is not the same as living," Ross said. "When did you last do something just because it brought you joy?" Josephine thought about that and realized she could not remember. "It has been a long time," she admitted. "Then perhaps we should change that," Ross suggested. He squeezed her hand gently and then released it, though she could still feel the warmth where he had touched her. "I have a day off in 3 days. Would you let me take you on a proper outing? Not just walking through town, but a real day out. We could ride up into the high country, have a picnic, see the mountains up close." Every instinct Josephine had screamed at her to refuse. Getting close to this man, letting him into her life, would only lead to more pain. If the curse was real, she would lose him too. If it was not real, if it truly was just terrible luck, well, who was to say her luck had changed? But as she looked into Ross's steady blue eyes, saw the hope and sincerity there, she found herself unable to say no. "Yes," she said, "I would like that." Ross's smile was bright enough to rival the sunset. "Then it is a date. I will pick you up at your house at 9 in the morning, and we will make a whole day of it." They walked back to town as darkness fell, talking about inconsequential things, favorite foods and childhood memories and dreams for the future. Ross told her about his years on various ranches, the places he had seen, and the people he had met. Josephine found herself telling him about her seamstress work, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from simple fabric, the quiet joy of getting a stitch just right. When they reached her small house, Ross walked her to the door like a gentleman. "Thank you for today," he said. "I have not enjoyed an afternoon this much in a very long time." "Neither have I," Josephine admitted. "Thank you for not listening to the gossip." "I told you I make up my own mind about people," Ross said. He hesitated, then added, "Josephine, I want you to know something. I am not afraid of you. I am not afraid of some supposed curse. The only thing I am afraid of is living my life alone when I might have a chance at happiness with someone extraordinary." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Josephine standing in her doorway with her heart pounding and her mind spinning. She went inside and leaned against the door, pressing her hands to her flushed cheeks. This was dangerous. This was foolish. This was everything she should avoid. And yet, she could not wait for 3 days to pass. The intervening days crept by with agonizing slowness. Josephine threw herself into her work, finishing the hotel curtains and starting on a dress for one of the few women in town who still gave her commissions. But her mind kept wandering to Ross, to the way he had held her hand, to the things he had said. She caught herself smiling at random moments, then scolding herself for being foolish. The gossip reached her ears, of course. Martha Miller had indeed spread the story, and now everyone in Williams was talking about the new cowboy who was courting death by courting the cursed widow. Several people from the ranch had apparently tried to warn Ross away, but he had politely dismissed their concerns. The general opinion seemed to be that he would learn his lesson soon enough, when tragedy inevitably struck. Josephine tried not to let the talk bother her, but it was hard. She found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was being selfish. What if something did happen to Ross? What if the curse was real, or if her terrible luck extended to anyone foolish enough to care for her? Could she live with herself if another man died because of her? But then she remembered his words. "The only thing I am afraid of is living my life alone when I might have a chance at happiness with someone extraordinary." Was she really going to let fear and superstition rob her of a chance at connection, at joy, at possibly even love? Had she not already lost enough? The morning of their outing arrived clear and bright, with the kind of high desert sunshine that made the whole world feel clean and new. Josephine dressed in her least somber dress, a dark blue cotton that at least was not black, and braided her hair into a practical style. She packed a basket with food, bread and cheese and dried apples, and waited by her window until she saw Ross riding up leading a second horse. He looked impossibly handsome in the morning light, his dark hair gleaming, his smile bright and genuine as she opened the door. "Good morning," he said. "Are you ready for an adventure?" "As ready as I will ever be," Josephine said, and was rewarded by his laugh. He helped her onto the horse, a gentle mare with kind eyes, and they set off toward the mountains at an easy pace. The morning was cool, but the sun warmed their shoulders as they rode through the ponderosa forest that surrounded Williams. Ross talked easily as they traveled, pointing out wildlife tracks and interesting rock formations, telling her stories about his years working ranches across the West. They climbed higher into the mountains, following game trails that wound through stands of aspen and Douglas fir. The air grew thinner and cleaner, and Josephine felt something in her chest loosening with every mile they put between themselves and town. Up here, there were no whispers, no judgment, no fearful looks. There was just the wind in the trees, the call of birds, the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves on the rocky ground. Ross led them to a meadow high in the mountains, where wildflowers were just beginning to bloom, and a small stream ran clear and cold. The San Francisco peaks rose above them, still snow-capped, magnificent against the blue sky. They dismounted and Ross spread a blanket in the sun while Josephine unpacked the food she had brought. They ate and talked and laughed, and Josephine realized she felt lighter than she had in years. "This is perfect," she said, lying back on the blanket and looking up at the sky. "Thank you for bringing me here." Ross lay down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. I wanted to give you a day away from all the ugliness in town. A day where you could just be Josephine, not the cursed widow or whatever other nonsense they call you. You have given me more than that, Josephine said softly. You have given me hope. I had forgotten what that felt like. She turned her head to look at him and found him already watching her, his blue eyes intense. Josephine, he said quietly, I know we have not known each other long. I know that by all rights I should take things slowly, should be cautious. But I have never been one for caution, and life has taught me that time is not guaranteed, so I am going to be honest with you. Josephine's heart began to pound. What do you mean? I mean that I am falling for you, Ross said simply. I have been since the moment we met. There is something about you that draws me, that makes me want to know everything about you, to make you smile, to protect you from all the small-minded people who have hurt you. I know the town says you are cursed. I know they say that any man who gets close to you is doomed. But I do not believe in curses, Josephine. I believe in bad luck and terrible timing and the random cruelty of the universe. And I believe that sometimes, if you are very fortunate, you meet someone who makes you want to take a chance anyway. Tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks before she could stop them. I am terrified, she whispered. I am terrified that something will happen to you, that you will die like the others, and it will be my fault for letting you close. Ross sat up and pulled her up with him, turning her to face him. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch unbearably gentle. Listen to me, he said firmly. If something happens to me, it will not be your fault. It will be an accident or bad luck or just the way life works sometimes. But I would rather have whatever time I can have with you than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. You are worth the risk, Josephine Sawyer. You are worth every risk. You barely know me, she protested weakly, even as her heart soared at his words. Then let me know you, Ross said. Let me court you properly. Let me prove to this entire town that there is no curse except the one they have created with their own fear and judgment. Let me show them that love is stronger than superstition. Josephine looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and determination. She thought about the years she had spent alone, isolated by fear and grief. She thought about the way Ross made her feel alive and hopeful and seen, and she made a choice. Yes, she said. Yes, court me. But Ross, you need to understand something. If we do this, the town will make your life miserable. They will treat you the way they treat me. Your job might be at risk. People will avoid you, whisper about you, judge you. Are you truly ready for that? I have faced down stampedes and blizzards and men who wanted to kill me over cards, Ross said with a slight smile. I think I can handle some gossip from frightened townspeople. Besides, I meant what I said. I will break that curse with love. I will show them that you are not doomed, that happiness is possible for you, that their superstitions have no power over real feeling. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Josephine did not move. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. She kissed him back, letting herself feel the hope and desire and possibility that she had locked away for so long. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Ross rested his forehead against hers. I am going to court you properly, he said. I am going to take you to dinner and dances and church socials. I am going to make sure everyone in Williams knows that I am proud to be with you. And when the time is right, when you are ready, I am going to ask you to marry me. And if you say yes, I am going to spend the rest of my life proving that curses do not exist, but love does. Josephine laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by the intensity of her feelings. You are either the bravest man I have ever met or the most foolish. Maybe both, Ross agreed cheerfully. But I have never been so certain about anything in my life. They spent the rest of the day in that meadow, talking and kissing and planning a future that felt both terrifying and wonderful. When they finally rode back to Williams as the sun was setting, Josephine felt different, stronger, more herself than she had been in years, and so began the courtship that scandalized Williams. Ross was true to his word. He called on Josephine every day he was not working. He took her to the restaurant, sat with her in full view of the whole town, and dared anyone to comment. He escorted her to the church social, standing by her side even when people gave them a wide berth, and danced with her despite the disapproving stares. The reaction from the town was immediate and harsh. People warned Ross constantly, telling him he was throwing his life away, that the curse would claim him just as it had claimed the others. His boss at the Triple Creek Ranch pulled him aside and suggested it might be better if he found a woman without such a dark history. Even Reverend Thompson tried to intervene, citing concern for Ross's soul and safety, but Ross remained unmoved. He met every warning with polite firmness, every attempt to dissuade him with calm logic. He pointed out that accidents happen to people all the time, whether they were married to Josephine or not. He noted that believing in curses was just another way of being afraid of life's unpredictability. He made it clear that he had made his choice, and no amount of superstitious hand-wringing was going to change his mind. Josephine watched him navigate the hostility with a mixture of admiration and terror. Part of her kept waiting for him to realize the cost was too high, that being with her was not worth becoming a social pariah. But Ross never wavered. If anything, the opposition seemed to make him more determined. "They will come around eventually," he told her one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the stars come out. "Once they see that I am not going to die dramatically the moment I get close to you, once they realize their curse has no basis in reality, they will move on to something else to gossip about." "I hope you are right," Josephine said, though she was not certain she believed it. The town had invested too much in her story, had made her a cautionary tale that confirmed their worldview. Admitting they were wrong would be difficult for them. As spring turned to summer, Ross continued his steady courtship. He brought her wildflowers from the high country. He fixed things around her house that had needed repair for years. He sat with her while she sewed, reading aloud from books or newspapers, filling her small home with his presence and warmth. Slowly, Josephine began to let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. They talked about everything during those long summer days. Ross told her about his dreams of owning his own ranch someday, of building something permanent after years of drifting. Josephine told him about her desire to do more than just survival sewing, to create beautiful things, maybe even sell her work beyond Williams. They talked about children, about whether it was fair to bring kids into a world that would remember their mother's history. They talked about God and faith, and whether the universe was cruel or indifferent or occasionally, unexpectedly kind. By August, Josephine knew she was in love with him. It had crept up on her gradually, not the passionate rush she had felt with Thomas when they were young, but something deeper and more solid. Ross had become essential to her, like air and water. When he was not there, she found herself listening for his footsteps. When he was there, everything felt right in a way nothing had for years. She knew he loved her too. He had not said the words yet, seemed to be waiting for the right moment, but she could see it in the way he looked at her, in the gentle touch of his hands, in the way he defended her to anyone who would listen. Ross Xavier had kept his promise. He was breaking the curse with love, one day at a time. It was on a hot day in late August that things came to a head. Ross had taken the day off, and he and Josephine had gone back to their meadow in the high country, the place that had become special to them. They had a picnic lunch and dozed in the sun, and when Josephine woke, she found Ross sitting beside her, looking at her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "Marry me," he said simply. Josephine sat up, her heart pounding. "What? Marry me?" Ross repeated. "I know it has only been a few months. I know the sensible thing would be to wait longer, to let the town get used to us. But I do not want to wait, Josephine. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a future together, have children if we are blessed, grow old watching the seasons change. Marry me, please." Josephine felt panic and joy warring inside her. This was everything she wanted and everything she feared. "Ross, 3 men have died after marrying me. 3. What if something happens to you? What if the curse is real? Then we will have had whatever time we had," Ross said steadily. "But I do not believe I am going to die, Josephine. I am careful. I am cautious when it matters. And I have this deep feeling right here," he pressed a hand to his chest, "that tells me we are meant to have a long life together. Trust me. Trust us." Josephine looked at his beloved face, at the hope and certainty in his eyes, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. She had spent 4 years letting fear control her life, letting other people's beliefs dictate her choices. Ross was offering her a chance to take back her life, to choose love over fear, hope over despair. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Ross's whoop of joy echoed off the mountains. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Josephine kissed him back with all the love and hope and desperate happiness in her heart. When they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time. "We will do it right," Ross said. "A proper wedding in the church, with the whole town invited. We will not hide or apologize. We will stand up in front of everyone and make our vows, and we will be happy, and they will see that their curse has no power." "They will try to stop us," Josephine warned. "They will say you are making a terrible mistake." "Let them try," Ross said confidently. "No one is going to keep me from marrying you, Josephine Sawyer. No one." He was right that people tried. When Ross announced their engagement, the reaction was immediate and intense. The ranch foreman told him he was fired, that the Triple Creek Ranch could not employ someone so foolish. Reverend Thompson initially refused to perform the ceremony, citing his responsibility to protect his flock. Martha Miller organized a group of women to try to convince Josephine to call it off, claiming it would be murder to marry another man. But Ross was relentless. He found work at another ranch, one run by a practical German immigrant who cared more about Ross's skill with horses than his choice of bride. He went to Reverend Thompson and quoted scripture about love and faith and the sin of judgment, until the older man reluctantly agreed to perform the ceremony. And when Martha Miller and her group showed up at Josephine's door, Ross was there, and he very politely but firmly told them to leave and not come back. "You are making a mistake," Martha said shrilly. "That woman is cursed. You will die, Mr. Xavier, just like the others." "If I die," Ross said calmly, "it will be an accident, not a curse. And I would rather live 1 year with Josephine than 50 years alone, afraid of shadows and superstition. Now please leave. You are not welcome here." After they left, Josephine turned to Ross with tears streaming down her face. "You are going to lose everything because of me. Your job, your reputation, your friends." "I am gaining everything that matters," Ross corrected gently, pulling her into his arms. "I am gaining you. That is worth any price." The wedding was set for the first week of September, when the aspens would be turning gold in the high country. Josephine sewed her own dress, a simple but beautiful gown of cream-colored silk that she had been saving for years. Ross bought a new suit and borrowed a wagon for the occasion. They sent invitations to everyone in Williams. knowing most would not come but wanting to extend the offer anyway. To their surprise, more people showed up than they expected. Carl from the restaurant came, and Sarah from the trading post, and several of the other people on the fringes of William's society who had experienced their own share of judgment and knew what it felt like. Even a few of the ranch hands from Ross's new job showed up, curious and supportive. It was not a large crowd, but it was more than Josephine had dared hope for. She walked down the aisle of the church alone, having no family left to give her away, but she kept her head high and her eyes on Ross, who stood at the altar looking at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. When she reached him, he took her hand and squeezed it gently, and Josephine felt a wave of love so intense it nearly took her breath away. Reverend Thompson performed the ceremony with professional dignity, though his discomfort was evident. When he got to the part about speaking now or forever holding your peace, there was a tense moment when it seemed someone might actually object. But the moment passed, and they continued through the vows. Do you, Ross Xavier, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Ross said clearly, his voice carrying through the church. And do you, Josephine Sawyer, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Josephine looked into Ross's eyes and saw her future there, bright and full of possibility. I do, she said firmly. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Ross did not need to be told twice. He pulled Josephine into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of their small but enthusiastic audience. When they broke apart, both of them were grinning, and Josephine realized she felt truly happy for the first time since before Thomas died. They held a small reception at Carl's restaurant, where those who had attended the wedding toasted their health and happiness. Ross was charming and gracious, making sure everyone felt welcome, while Josephine found herself actually enjoying the social interaction after years of isolation. Sarah gave them a beautiful turquoise necklace as a wedding gift, and Carl provided the food free of charge, his own wedding present to the couple. As the sun set and their guests began to drift away, Ross took Josephine's hand and led her outside. They stood together in the cool evening air, looking up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. We did it, Josephine said softly. We are married. We did, Ross agreed, wrapping his arms around her from behind. And I am going to wake up tomorrow morning alive and well, and every day after that for the next 50 years. No curse, no tragic end, just a long, happy life together. I hope you are right, Josephine said, leaning back against his solid warmth. I am right, Ross said confidently. You will see. They spent their wedding night in Josephine's small house, which was now their house. Ross carried her over the threshold, making her laugh, and they made love with a tenderness and passion that left Josephine feeling cherished and complete. Afterward, lying in Ross's arms, listening to his steady heartbeat beneath her ear, she let herself believe that maybe the curse truly was broken. The next morning, Ross woke up alive and healthy, exactly as he had promised. And the morning after that, and the one after that. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and still Ross remained stubbornly, wonderfully alive. He went to work every day, came home every night, and filled their home with love and laughter and the kind of comfortable partnership Josephine had always dreamed of. As winter arrived, bringing snow to the high country and cold winds to Williams, people began to take notice. Xavier had been married to the cursed widow for 3 months and showed no signs of dying. In fact, he seemed healthier and happier than ever. People started to whisper different things now, wondering if maybe they had been wrong, if perhaps the curse had been broken after all. Martha Miller, to her credit, was one of the first to admit her mistake. She showed up at their door one cold December morning with a pie and an apology. "I was wrong about you," she said stiffly to Josephine. "I let fear and superstition guide my judgment instead of Christian charity. I am sorry for the way I treated you, and I hope you can forgive me." Josephine, who had every right to slam the door in the woman's face, surprised herself by accepting the apology. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." As word spread that Martha Miller had apologized, others began to follow suit. It was slow, and some people remained convinced that disaster was just around the corner, but gradually, the atmosphere in Williams began to shift. Josephine found herself greeted on the street instead of avoided. Women began to bring her sewing commissions again. The isolation that had defined her life for 4 years began to ease. Ross watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. "I told you," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, Josephine sewing while Ross read the newspaper. "Love is stronger than superstition." "They are finally starting to see that." "You were right," Josephine admitted, "about everything. I cannot believe how different my life is now compared to a year ago." "Our life," Ross corrected gently. "It is our life now." That winter was the happiest Josephine could remember. She and Ross settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They talked about their future, about Ross's dream of owning his own ranch and Josephine's hope of expanding her seamstress business. They made love and laughed, and argued about silly things like any normal couple. And through it all, Ross remained healthy and whole, living proof that Josephine's supposed curse had been nothing but coincidence and bad luck. Spring came again, bringing warmth and wildflowers and new life to the high desert. Josephine discovered she was pregnant in late April, and the joy and terror that discovery brought was almost overwhelming. She had never carried a child to term before, had lost 2 pregnancies in the years between husbands, and the fear that something would go wrong haunted her. But Ross was steady and optimistic as always. "Our child is going to be fine," he said firmly, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "You are going to be fine. We are going to be parents, Josephine, and it is going to be wonderful." He was right. The pregnancy progressed normally, and as Josephine's belly grew, so did the town's acceptance. People who had shunned her for years now stopped to ask how she was feeling, to offer advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. It was as though by carrying Ross's child, by being so visibly part of a normal, happy marriage, Josephine had finally been granted permission to rejoin the community. Their son was born on a cold December morning, nearly a year to the day after Martha Miller's apology. The labor was long and difficult, but Josephine was strong, and when she finally held her baby in her arms, she wept with relief and joy. Ross sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, staring at their son with wonder and pride. "He is perfect," Ross whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Josephine's first husband, because Ross said it was important to honor the past even as they built the future. Little Thomas was a healthy, happy baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. He brought even more light into their lives, filled their home with his cries and coos and eventually his laughter. The first year of Thomas's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and precious moments. Ross was an devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with a fussy baby and making funny faces to coax out smiles. Josephine had never seen him happier, and watching him with their son made her fall in love with him all over again. By the time Thomas was walking, Ross had saved enough money to make a down payment on a small ranch property east of Williams. It was not much, just 100 acres with a modest house and barn, but it was theirs. They moved out of the small house in town and into their new home, and Ross began the work of building his dream. He was good at it, Josephine realized. Good at breeding horses, good at managing cattle, good at all the 1,000 small tasks that went into running a successful ranch. He hired a few hands to help, including a young man named Luke who reminded Josephine a bit of Thomas at that age, full of enthusiasm and optimism. The ranch began to prosper, slowly but steadily, and their lives took on a comfortable rhythm of work and family. Josephine's seamstress business grew as well. With the curse finally and thoroughly broken in the eyes of the town, women came to her not just for basic alterations but for beautiful custom gowns and quilts and other fine work. She hired 2 young women to help her, teaching them the skills she had learned over the years, and felt a deep satisfaction in passing on her knowledge. 3 years after Thomas was born, Josephine had another baby, a daughter they named Rose. She had Ross's easy smile and Josephine's green eyes, and she was as different from her brother as could be. Where Thomas was cautious and thoughtful, Rose was bold and adventurous. She kept them on their toes and made them laugh with her fearless approach to life. Ross had been right about everything. He had been married to Josephine for over 5 years now, with no sign of the tragic fate that had befallen her previous husbands. He was healthy and strong, running a successful ranch and raising his children with love and wisdom. The curse that had defined Josephine's life for so long had been thoroughly, completely broken. But more than that, he had given her back her life. The fear and isolation that had consumed her for years had been replaced by joy and community and purpose. She was no longer the cursed widow of Williams. She was Josephine Xavier, wife and mother and businesswoman, respected member of the community, living proof that love could indeed conquer fear. On their 6th anniversary, Ross took Josephine back to the meadow where he had proposed. It was early September again, and the aspens were turning gold just as they had been on their wedding day. They left the children with Sarah for the afternoon and rode into the high country together, following the familiar trails. When they reached the meadow, they spread a blanket and lay together in the sun, holding hands and watching the clouds drift by. "Do you remember when I told you I would break the curse with love?" Ross asked. "I remember," Josephine said. "I thought you were either very brave or very foolish." "I was both," Ross admitted with a laugh. "But I was also right. There was no curse, Josephine. There never was. Just terrible luck and a town full of frightened people looking for someone to blame, but we showed them. We built a life together, a good life, and we proved that love is stronger than superstition." "You showed them," Josephine corrected. "You were the one who refused to believe, who kept pushing forward when everyone else said to stop. You saved me, Ross." Ross rolled onto his side and looked down at her, his expression serious. "No," he said firmly. "You saved yourself. You survived losses that would have broken most people. You kept going when you had every reason to give up. You were strong enough to take a chance on love again, even though you had every reason to be terrified. All I did was recognize your strength and give you a reason to let it show." Josephine felt tears slide down her temples and into her hair. After all these years, Ross still had the power to move her with his words. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Ross said, leaning down to kiss her. "And I am going to keep loving you for the next 50 years, just like I promised. We are going to grow old together, Josephine. We are going to watch our children grow up and have children of their own. We are going to build something lasting and beautiful. And years from now, people will have forgotten all about curses and will only remember the story of a cowboy who fell in love with an extraordinary woman. As they lay together in the autumn sunshine, surrounded by the golden aspens and the eternal mountains, Josephine let herself believe in the future Ross was describing. The past would always be with her, the memories of the men she had loved and lost, but it no longer defined her. She had a present full of love and a future full of hope, and that was more than she had ever thought possible. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges and joys. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who loved the ranch and had his father's gift with horses. Rose became a spirited girl who was constantly getting into adventures and making her parents both laugh and worry. Ross and Josephine had one more child, another son they named William, who was quiet and gentle and loved books more than cattle. The ranch prospered, growing from those original 100 acres to more than 500. Ross's reputation as a horse breeder spread, and people came from as far as Santa Fe and Tucson to buy his animals. Josephine's sewing business became one of the most successful in the territory, and she trained more than a dozen young women in the skills of fine needlework. But more important than any material success was the life they built together. Their home was filled with love and laughter, with Sunday dinners that included not just their own family, but also the ranch hands and any friends who needed a place to belong. They became pillars of the Williams community, known for their generosity and kindness, and the way they welcomed anyone who needed help. The story of the cursed widow gradually faded from town memory, replaced by the story of Ross and Josephine Xavier, the couple who had built a good life through hard work and love. The younger generation growing up in Williams barely knew about Josephine's first 3 husbands, and when they did hear the story, it was told as a cautionary tale about the dangers of superstition rather than about curses. Martha Miller, who had become a good friend to Josephine over the years, once said, "I am ashamed when I think about how we treated you. We were so certain we knew what was true, and we were so terribly wrong. You taught us all an important lesson about judgment and fear." "We all did the best we could with what we knew at the time," Josephine replied gently. "The important thing is that we learned and grew. That is all any of us can do." On their 20th anniversary, Ross planned a surprise party for Josephine. He invited the whole town, and nearly everyone came. They gathered at the ranch, filling the house and yard with celebration. People gave speeches about how much Ross and Josephine meant to the community, how their love had changed Williams for the better, how they were an example of what was possible when people chose hope over fear. Josephine stood with Ross's arm around her waist, their 3 children grown and beautiful beside them, and looked out at the crowd of friends and neighbors. She thought about the lonely, isolated woman she had been 20 years ago, and could hardly believe how much her life had changed. All because one stubborn cowboy had refused to believe in curses and had chosen to believe in her instead. "Thank you," she whispered to Ross as the party continued around them. "For what?" he asked, pulling her closer. "For seeing me when no one else would. For loving me when everyone said you should not. For giving me this life." Ross smiled and kissed her forehead. "Thank you for trusting me enough to take the chance. Thank you for being brave enough to love again. Thank you for giving me a family and a home and more happiness than I ever thought possible. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Josephine Xavier, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." As the sun set over the San Francisco peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple, Josephine leaned into her husband's embrace and felt nothing but contentment. The curse that had haunted her for so long was truly broken, shattered by the power of genuine love and unwavering faith. She had lost much in her life, had carried grief and guilt and fear for years, but she had also gained more than she ever dreamed possible. Their children married and had children of their own. Thomas took over running the ranch when Ross decided to slow down, and he ran it with the same skill and dedication his father had. Rose married a doctor and moved to Flagstaff, but she visited often with her growing family. William became a teacher, opening a school in Williams that served not just the white children, but also the Native American children from the surrounding area, something that made both his parents fiercely proud. Ross and Josephine grew old together, just as he had promised on that day in the meadow so many years ago. Their hair turned silver, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived, but the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it grew deeper with each passing year, enriched by shared memories and the knowledge that they had built something real and lasting together. They spent their later years sitting on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset and telling stories to their grandchildren. The children loved to hear about how their grandfather had defied the whole town to marry their grandmother, how he had broken a curse with love, how he had proven that believing in someone was more powerful than believing in superstition. Was she really cursed, Grandpa? One of the grandchildren would inevitably ask, and Ross would smile and say, "No, sweetheart. There was never any curse. Your grandmother just had terrible luck and lived in a town full of frightened people. But she survived it all, and she became the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known." The only magic in this story is the magic of love and choosing to be brave when everyone else is afraid. Josephine would squeeze his hand and add, "Your grandfather saved my life by refusing to believe the worst about me. He taught me that we get to write our own stories, that other people's fears do not have to become our reality. That is the real lesson, my darlings. Do not let anyone tell you that you are cursed or doomed or less than you are. You get to decide who you are and what your life means." Ross Xavier lived to the age of 78, dying peacefully in his sleep with Josephine beside him after more than 50 years of marriage. He had been right about everything. There had been no curse, no tragic early death, just a long, full life filled with love and purpose and joy. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people from all over the territory, all of them coming to pay respects to a man who had been known for his integrity, his kindness, and his unwavering faith in the woman he loved. Josephine lived for another 5 years after Ross died, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She never remarried, saying that she had been blessed with 4 great loves in her life, and that was more than most people got. She spent her final years quilting and sewing, teaching her skills to anyone who wanted to learn, telling stories about the old days and the cowboy who had loved her enough to change everything. When Josephine passed away in her sleep at the age of 83, the whole town of Williams mourned. She was remembered not as the cursed widow, but as a beloved matriarch, a successful businesswoman, a devoted wife and mother, and a woman whose life had taught them all important lessons about judgment and redemption. They buried her next to Ross on a hillside overlooking their ranch, with the San Francisco peaks rising in the distance and the aspens turning gold in the autumn sun. Her headstone reads simply, "Josephine Xavier, beloved wife, mother, and friend, she taught us that love is stronger than fear." And in Williams, Arizona, the story that was passed down through generations was not about a curse or mysterious deaths or superstitious townspeople. It was the story of a cowboy named Ross Xavier, who had looked at a woman everyone else was afraid of and had seen only her strength and beauty and worth. It was a story about how one person's faith could change everything, how love could indeed break any curse, and how choosing to believe in someone could give them back their life. Years later, when Thomas Xavier's great-granddaughter wrote a book about the history of Williams, she devoted an entire chapter to Ross and Josephine. She wrote about the courage it took for both of them to defy the town's expectations, about the life they built together, about the family they raised and the legacy they left. She ended the chapter with a quote from one of Josephine's old letters, words that had been preserved through the generations. "People said I was cursed," Josephine had written, "and for a long time I believed them. But Ross taught me that the only curse was my own fear and other people's judgment. He showed me that love is not about being safe or avoiding risk. It is about being brave enough to open your heart even when you have every reason to keep it closed. It is about choosing hope over despair, connection over isolation, life over fear. That cowboy did not just break a curse. He gave me back myself, and that is the greatest gift anyone can give another person." And so the story lived on, told and retold, a reminder that the things that seem most impossible are sometimes the most real. That curses can be broken not with magic or ritual but with simple, steadfast love. That one person who believes in you can change the entire trajectory of your life. And that sometimes, in the wild and beautiful landscape of the American West, a cowboy and a widow could find each other against all odds and build something that would outlast them both. A love story for the ages that proved beyond any doubt that believing in someone, truly believing in them with your whole heart, is the most powerful force in the world. The ranch that Ross and Josephine built together still stands today, run by their descendants, a testament to what two people can create when they refuse to let fear win. And on quiet evenings, when the sun sets over the San Francisco peaks and the aspens shimmer gold in the fading light, you can almost feel their presence there. Two souls who found each other in the hardest of times and held on through everything, proving that love, real love, is indeed stronger than any curse.